In this lesson, I'm going to really focus on stakeholders, but from a high-level point of view. So let me start with a simple definition of what a stakeholder is first. So a stakeholder in a project is someone, an individual person or a group that has interest in their project. And we should be aware of who the different stakeholders are. So they can be affected by the project or they can affect the project. So either way. And these can include investment people, team members, clients, users, and so on. Okay, so there are different kinds of stakeholders, and in general project management we think of internal to the project and external to the project. So internal stakeholders are individuals in a group within the organization, so they can have direct influence on the project. So an example from the solar panel project we discussed in the previous lesson. So we'd have the project managers, the team members, the facilities staff, the finance staff, and so on. Then what about external stakeholders? Well, these could be individuals or group outside the organization. So they can also have an impact, or they can be impacted by the project. So for example, the local government office for the licensing agreement, the local companies in the area, because now they will see the solar panels on top, maybe an insurance company, energy company, and so on. Okay, now let's look at what we mean by gathering an overview of the stakeholders. And here I'd like to talk about the concept of creating a stakeholder mind map, okay? And that gives you a good overview on what the different stakeholders are and how they relate to each other. Now in the book, the PM book.guide, it gives a very good indication or a good information on using a mind map to do this type of overview of all your different stakeholders. And it's really good then for the project manager to be able to show this to other people in the project, so we'll all have a better overview on who the different stakeholders are. Once you identify these stakeholders, then you should try to figure out how to communicate with them. And because the quicker you hear about concerns, the much better, the much easier it is for the project manager then to take action on those. So because hearing about concerns late in a project can be expensive, but if it's early, it can have a lot of value. And we also want to make these people aware that the project is starting and what the project is about. Let me give you an example. So let's say we have a new website project being built, and this new website is going to gather information about people for about 40,000 users. Okay, so you just keep your communication within a small environment, as little as a little group of stakeholders as possible. And so you're saving this information. And after about 6 months, the website is live. Already 38,000 people have registered. But someone from the legal department finds out about the project and says, hold on. According to law, like GDPR policies, you cannot save this information here in their project. And now you've got to do something about it. So you've got maybe 2 to 3 months rework in order to fix this, in order to comply with the law. So this is all rework. So if you made those people aware about your project from the beginning, you could have saved all of this rework. So it's a good idea, or please don't be afraid to tell the world about your project within your organization that it's going to start up. Okay? If you're working for the Secret Service, of course, then don't tell anybody. But most of the time, tell people. I want to give you a bit more information about internal stakeholders. So having a good team for the project is really key, and they get along with each other. And how can you get support to make sure you have the right people on the project? Well, as a project manager, you are trying to facilitate the project and attract people to the project. So you basically have to ask more senior people in the organization. So you have that role, which is a sponsor role. PRINCE2 calls it project executive. So that's the main role that you should be working with first. Then you have a high-level person that represents the users, and probably a high-level person that represents the suppliers. So you can also ask them, okay, who do you think should be in this project and why? All right. So, and keep asking them until you get it. And if people don't come in, then go back to these people and keep insisting that you need these extra people in the organization, in the project. One of the principles which are mentioned in PRINCE2 is the following. It's called define roles and responsibilities and relationships. So this is all about people, and it's really good to have defined roles so people will know what to expect from themselves, but also what to expect from each other. And the relationships is all about understanding the relationships between the different stakeholders, and then we can figure out, okay, if certain is some of these relationships needs to be improved or not, and then do it. I don't like to introduce too many new words here, many terms in this second iteration of the training, but I'm going to mention ecosystem. So let me start with a general overview of what ecosystem is. So the first time I heard about this was when I did biology. So what is an ecosystem? It's a community of living organisms and their interactions in an environment. So PRINCE2 has taken that word ecosystem and it says, okay, there is a project ecosystem and an organizational ecosystem. So now let me explain that to you. So it says a project ecosystem includes all parts of the business that are affected by the project, as well as the people and companies that use or provide the things for the project. So it's basically everybody impacted or can impact the project. They're really tied to the project. And then an organizational system is completely wide. It's like a big family with cousins and third cousins, and that can include lots of other people, even people working outside the organization, let's say even competitors, customers for other projects, or the departments that were done, other partners and so on. So it's really, really wired. But of course, from a project point of view, we're really focused on the project ecosystem. PRINCE2 for a number of years has been talking about there are 3 project interests in a project. So one you should, or let's call them 3 big hats. One is a hat to wear for a business point of view. So that's somebody who should be thinking about the value for money. One hat from a user point of view. That hat should be thinking about, hey, are we able to use what's being produced by the project? And another hat would be to represent the people who have to create the product, whether it's IT development skills or whether it's a building or something like that. So it's their hat as well. And it says these are 3 project interests that has to be in every project. We must keep them in every project. Okay, I will come back to this in a moment. I'll do it now. I want to give you an overview of the different roles in a PRINCE2 project, but without getting too technical. So let's see how this goes. So the first hat I just mentioned, it was that business hat, and PRINCE2 calls that the project executive, which I've mentioned already, but sponsor is also another name. So they're always asking what's the justification for the project, and they keep their business hat on. Then we've got someone who represents the users, one of the 3 project interests. And so they're always asking, well, will the product be able to use as expected? Okay, so who can that be in an organization? Well, let's say if we were creating a new sales application for a sales department, then the sales manager would be definitely one of those people who represent the users. And they may have 2 or 3 people, maybe 2, who knows all the sales processes within that department. So they will also form part of a representation team for that department. And PRINCE2 calls that the senior user. Okay, so it can be more than one person. And then from a technical point of view, well, maybe we've got different types of technology and what we're trying to do. So we'll have different, maybe 3 or 4 people representing the different companies that will deliver the skills and the know-how and the techniques to create something. So those people together, we call them the supplier representatives, but we can group them in the heads of that, and we call it the senior supplier. That's where the word comes from. So there are a group of representatives who represent the supplier, who represent the users, and we've got always one person who represents the business. That's it. Then we have a person who facilitates the project, manages the project, and leads the project. And we call that the project manager. They're usually very nice people. Then we have a role for administrating the project. So all the admin, all the documentation, keeping an overview of how things are, the documents are, keeping data up to date in a central system and so on. So those are really all the admin tasks. And PRINCE2 calls that project support because it supports the project. And then we have the teams, and each team will have its own leader, which they can act as the person the project manager talks to, because if they're speaking to a team, they cannot talk to a team of 11 people, everyone individually. It's better off that each team has one spokesperson for that time, and the project manager has a one-to-one conversation with them. That makes it easier to work with and to do reporting and to pass on instructions, let's say. So we call that the team manager, and they work with what we call team members. All right, now in Appendix B of the PRINCE2 manual, it has a complete section which describes all of the roles, but we will discuss that later within the project as well. There are just two more things I want to touch on here on a very high point of view. One of them is culture. So you often heard about a country having a certain culture. Well, a project has a certain culture as well. And when the project starts up, of course, it's going to inherit the culture from its surroundings, so from the organization itself. But part of what the project manager does is try to build a better team working together, so they'll automatically begin to change the culture of the team, whether they like it or not, and hopefully they are changing it for the better. And how would a project manager know? How could they be able to rate their own culture or to check on it? Well, they can ask some basic questions like, how open are team members to learn? That's about the whole psychology of the people, the frame of mind of those people. If they have a willingness to learn new skills, then you know that they're going to adapt very quickly to their project. Are they good at sharing knowledge? Hopefully they are, because that really then bonds the team, because people can start learning from each other. If they're very protective of their knowledge, that's going to really affect the culture. We'll have a bad project culture. And the other one is when we come up to a problem, do actually the team work together to solve the problem? Or does one person say, no, I will solve the problem, that's it, you all keep away, I will give it to you? That won't be good either. So we have a shared experience when we try to solve problems as well. So that's all about culture. That's an introduction to culture. And now leadership. PRINCE2 talks a lot about leadership at the beginning of its manual. So a project manager actually does quite a number of things. They facilitate the project, they lead the project, and they manage the project. So use those three. But PRINCE2 amazingly says it leads and manages. I use the word facilitate a lot because that's my favorite way of describing what a project manager can do. So leadership, what is it then? It's about the ability to inspire and guide a team. They can do that by setting a clear vision and direction of what to do, and then getting everybody online in the team to actually go in that direction. Okay, so they really will help people to be self-motivated and to move them. Right, I think that was a good introduction to stakeholders. You now have a better idea on some of the concepts we introduced, and staying as high as possible without going into too much detail.